Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Burning Platform. This time I have Kurt Marko. He is one hell of a brilliant guy, not just IT. He's an electrical engineering graduate from Stanford. And we banter back and forth on a number of topics. And the topic for today is what is going on with renewables and climate change, and what is hype and what is reality. Kurt, spend a minute bragging about yourself, then we'll jump into this big, huge, controversial topic.
Sure. Thanks, Vinnie. Yeah, I have kind of a diverse background. I think probably my natural curiosity meant that I was never satisfied staying in one discipline for too long. But my original background was in semiconductor device physics and doing process development for it started, I was in memory chips, DRAM chips. From that, I kind of got into circuit design, circuit CAD development, board design, product development for laser printers, and evolved into IT when that became kind of a formal discipline in the 90s, and was an IT architect at Hewlett Packard. Kind of my chip era was in some smaller companies. Actually, I did a short stint at Micron long before it was the behemoth it is now. It was really struggling. And then a longer stint at Bell Labs. So I spent a pretty good career at HP, both in R&D and IT. Left that when after the split, and the company was kind of drifting, and decided that I was pretty good at this whole communicating, writing, turning complicated technical concepts into understandable narratives. And so struck out on my own doing that. And it was a kind of a tough struggle early, but I've been doing that for about 16 years now. In fact, that's how we first met years ago. You probably don't even remember. I was writing for this little publication, and I did a book review of one of your first, it might have been the New Florence book. I think that was the title. But anyway,
New Polymath, yes.
Yeah, that one. I may still have it on the shelf downstairs, but
well, I'm flattered.
So, and now I've been doing technical writing, analysis for the last 16 years. Good. I write publications. I do both sponsored and for publications like Diginomica or Packet Pushers. So,
Kurt, what you said, taking very complicated, geeky topics and making them understandable, you're very good at that. So let's based on your chip background, we should just talk about the supply chain issues around chips, but let's talk first about green. I'll bring you back for another episode for
sure.
That. So, about a decade ago, in fact, in the New Polymath, I wrote about my excitement about the whole sustainability, the whole renewables area, right? And I've gradually lost faith, maybe too early, in both wind and solar. And then I see what Germany did. Merkel put almost $1 trillion in wind and solar, and it barely meets today 20% of their total energy needs. In fact, she left the country, and she was lauded as the climate chancellor. She left the country heavily dependent on Russian gas, insecure as it is, and lignite, which is a particularly dirty form of coal. Okay, so now we, the U.S., seem to be all hot on the concept. Where do you stand? Am I just?
No, you're spot on. The problem is that renewable energy. This was a thing back in the the late 70s when I was at Stanford. In fact, I still have a text of a book, text of a class I took called, like, what was it? Like A Better Green Planet, or it was a Professor Gil Masters, if people are interested in looking him up. And he was an early proponent of what we now call renewable. Basically, it was mostly solar energy. But in those days, photovoltaics were, they were so inefficient and expensive that they were not practical for anything, more than a watch. So it was all about passive solar. So people that are old enough will remember the early solar heating units with pipes on people's roofs that, were basically radiators pumping fluid through black panels that would go down into that. Anyway, and there were various architectural design techniques that you could do to maximize insolation, the term for the solar energy input to a home. You could maximize that in the winter when you needed it and minimize it in the summer by different design techniques, eave heights or eave sizes. So the whole goal of that, though, was a way to reduce the energy dependence on traditional sources, but not eliminate it. In the last 10 or 15 years, I think we've taken this attitude that it's got to be like an all or nothing approach, that everything has to be a so-called renewable, really it's not even renewable, it's just a non-fossil, non-nuclear fuel. And it's, as you say, that leaves you incredibly vulnerable, mainly to the weather itself. Cloudy days, dusty days.
Intermittent energy is what they call it.
Right. And I guess my view is that we've gotten away from the science of optimizing the energy supply chain into a value system where, or a religion, if you want to call it that. I think in certain respects, you look at Greta Thunberg, it is a religious expression that, my life is in grave danger, that, I won't be able to survive on this planet. It will be turned into Venus by the time I'm 35 if we don't do something, which is ludicrous, but that's where we're at. And it's amazing to me that so many corporations, profit-driven corporations, are just standing up and saluting the renewable energy, movement, even where it doesn't make economic sense.
Kurt, you mentioned nuclear. One of the interesting things as I've looked at Germany is, if you look at the European map, France, Iceland, and Norway look much greener in terms of, carbon intensity and so on.
Right.
And France has done it with nuclear. Iceland's done it with geothermal, and Norway has been blessed with plenty of hydroelectric. They also have a lot of North Sea gas, but they have internal use is hydroelectric. Why don't we hear some of those? I mean, even if you want to remove away from fossils, why don't we hear about alternatives to wind and solar? It just seems like wind and solar are getting all the attention.
Well, there's environmental, this is where the environmental movement and the climate change movement have coalesced into this big virtue signaling group hug. The environmental ideology will not allow you to have nuclear or hydro because of the perception, well, there is some reality to it, but the exaggeration of the environmental damage done by those things. With nuclear, it's the mining and processing of uranium, the long-term disposal of it, all of which, we have much better understanding of than 40 years ago when 3 Mile Island happened. And with hydro, it's disturbing the natural stream flow of rivers, flooding basins, increasing water temperature above dams and downstream at certain times of the year that disturbs certain wildlife. I mean, which is the reason California flushes enormous amounts of its scarce water that is stored in Sierra Nevada reservoirs out through the Delta, to protect some smelt. So both of those have, there's this environmental pressure that they're bad for the planet in other ways, not the carbon dioxide greenhouse gas way.
On the other hand, it just seems like one of the other things that is kind of mind-boggling is, President Biden apologized at Glasgow last week, and President Obama did again yesterday, where they apologize to the world and say, we're sorry we left Paris and so on. The reality is the United States in 2020 had as many emissions as in 1990. I don't know how many other countries can say that. With 30 years of progress, our emissions haven't gone up. On the other hand, if you look at China, that's 2.5 times their emissions. If you look at India, that's equal to the EU. If you look at Russia and Indonesia and Brazil, together, they're equal to us. I mean, they are basically showing the world the middle finger and saying, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. So it seems like we're punishing ourselves or trying to be diligent in different ways. But the rest of the, not the rest of the world, certain big, fast-growing economies that are making mockery of everything we're doing. How do we highlight that?
Well, I'm going to just back up a minute, and I reject the framing of carbon dioxide as an emission.
Okay.
It's not a toxic substance. It's part of natural human respiration. It's critical for plant life.
True.
This notion that we've put it in the same category as acid rain, atmospheric acidification, sulfur dioxide,
methane, yep,
is ludicrous. I mean, yes, it has a absorption spectrum of long wave radiation, which can alter weather dynamics. But this notion that it's an unnatural substance is crazy. And the idea that it doesn't vary, it hasn't varied enormously throughout history, is, well, I don't think many people even appreciate the fact that the carbon dioxide levels, the graphs everyone shows are this tiny 40-year window from the top of Mauna Kea, measuring parts per million, showing a roughly, well, it started linear. I mean, it's now bending over. It's asymptotically appears to be leveling out, but the ocean that it's an emission, I think, is the first sign that you're dealing with not a scientific argument anymore, that you're trying to frame it as something toxic when it's not.
Well, so, okay, let me take that I'll grant you that. Why then are we so negative on fossils in the West?
Well, I mean, we have, I mean, that boils down to the cartoon image that most people have of climate change, is that burning anything that comes out of the ground, a fossil fuel, methane, ethane, you name it, creates carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Carbon dioxide is a component to this really complex weather system that affects the absorption of energy from the earth, long wave radiation. So when, basically we have a system in which we're inputting solar radiation and some cosmic radiation, I believe, at very short wavelengths. It's diffused through the atmosphere. Some of it gets reflected back through clouds, which is another greenhouse factor, water vapor. Some hits the surface and is re-radiated at longer wavelengths. CO2 has a property in that it absorbs those wavelengths, and it doesn't absorb the shorter, so they pass through and are reflected. And hence the greenhouse metaphor, because glass acts in a similar fashion. Ultraviolet rays pass through, radiated, infrared heat is contained. But back to your question, is we've created this mental image with people that carbon dioxide is acting as like this lid on the entire planet, that the more there is, the hotter it's going to be. When in reality, we're dealing with like hundreds of physical mechanisms going on, of which carbon dioxide is one of them. And based on much of the data that I've seen, that the relationship between temperature increase and carbon dioxide levels is not linear, that as we're to a point in that relationship that as you double the concentrations, the incremental temperature change is likely, not double. In other words, if from a baseline level to what we have now, 400 parts per million is, say, 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees Kelvin. Going to 800 is not likely to get you another 1.5 because of all these other complicating factors. Increase in water vapor, different ocean patterns, different cloud patterns. So, but that's all lost on the debate. And it's all become carbon dioxide leads to hotter planet, therefore we must reduce carbon dioxide. So we've got this complicated problem has come down to one knob that we're supposed to turn.
So in effect, we are shackling ourselves, and we made fossils like the tobacco industry, whereas
Correct.
The fast-growing part of the world is continuing on as if they're basically not listening to that, right? So this is going to have a significant impact in the way the world is rebalanced.
Well, and it's even, it's more pernicious even than just demonizing fossil, because at the same time, because we have to, we're worshiping these renewables. In the debate, we're minimizing all the externalities of those renewables. As treating, just because you can't see emissions from a Tesla doesn't mean there aren't any. It's just that they're removed. They're at some power plant far away. They're in, energy losses in the grid. They're at some lithium mines and other rare earth mines in Bolivia. They're in the
solar panels are made in coal-fired plants in China. So to your point, yeah.
So with wind turbines, take a tour under a wind farm sometime and count the dead birds. I mean, we minimize the externalities, the neighbors of near wind farms, the noise pollution. But that's, again, we can't admit those because it undermines the narrative that has to be promoted, that these sources of energy are somehow more virtuous than anything else, when in reality they're another means of providing the energy that we need to power a modern economy. And we should be doing that as cleanly, yes, as efficiently, yes, but as cost effectively as possible.
I know you spent some time at HP. One thing I'm actually quite encouraged about in the sustainability space is it's called the circular economy, right? People are starting to design products with reuse in mind, refurbishment in mind. And I know HP, at least in the printer side, is already starting to do that. But I'm seeing more and more companies encourage reuse, right? Are you seeing enough in that aspect of this? But it seems like renewables are getting all the attention. The circular economy part of it is still not getting enough attention.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that term before, but that's actually a tremendous byproduct of what's been going on. Companies are finally starting to take a more holistic view of the byproducts of what they produce, and trying to minimize the bad, the waste, while still providing the good. I mean, you see it in even simple things like the packaging of products. We're finding more creative ways of designing packaging with less material, made out of paper, mostly less plastic, again, a renewable source if you're allowed to plant and cut down trees, which is another issue, at least in my part of the country. But that's a very positive thing. Or the recycling. Send your old phone back to Apple. You get some money out of it. They'll cannibalize it for parts and dispose of the battery, which again, another externality we don't like to think about. These batteries wear out and they're full of not very good stuff that you really don't want leaching out of your landfill. But all of that, the recycling, well, HP doesn't like recycling of ink cartridges for other reasons, but but at least sending back the used ones to keep them out of the hands of those nasty recyclers and allowing HP to reclaim the components, it's a good thing.
And I mean, you use the battery example. I mean, not having to be dependent as much on rare earths and war-torn regions of the world for some of those materials. So yeah, I wish we would focus the sustainability focus on that, the circular economy part. But maybe it'll happen more and more. Let's talk about, you and I cover the software industry. You cover a lot more. But what can the software industry? I mean, they've done SAP, for example, 10 years ago had this big focus on sustainability, but it was mostly about reporting about what they were doing, right? So it was analytics. When I kept telling them, look, you guys are in the lab, the R&D lab, you guys are in the product design area. Why aren't you helping companies think through some of the issues? And it was much more of an analytical focus. What are you seeing in terms of software vendors and the opportunity in this area?
Well, I think you can go back to the auto manufacturers back in the 80s when they got scared by the Japanese influx, and they started to use software to design more efficient vehicles, more aerodynamic, more, better, more efficient combustion. And that has, we're like light years beyond that, but it's pervaded many, pretty much every industry now, that advanced modeling and simulation of all kinds of products is allowing designers to tune not only the efficiency, but the behavior and functionality of all these products to a degree that wasn't possible before. In fact, I just got off and I'm writing about it this week, the keynote from NVIDIA, where one of the major themes is, they call it an omniverse, but it's essentially the creation of three-dimensional digital replicas of products and spaces to allow them to be manipulated and tested to improve the product design. So think of it as, and my analogy is, think of it like Zuckerberg's metaverse, but actually with a enterprise dollars and cents purpose.
Well, they probably shouldn't be associating it with the metaverse. Poor Mark is getting a hard time.
Yeah, and that's, I'm gonna ding them on that. That's an unfortunate turn of phrase, but I think you're seeing software being used to improve hardware and processes, logistics, more efficient supply chain, delivery routes, and all of that. One of the measures that is used of success is, does it reduce energy efficiency? Improve energy efficiency, reduce usage. One of the areas you see in something I cover closely, cloud computing and computing platforms, is the extreme acceptance of the ARM CPU architecture for enterprise workloads, and that's really taking off. It started with Amazon AWS with Graviton. You've got Ampere, you've got Bamboo, you've got a whole bunch of companies now, and one of the big benefits there is doing a given amount of work with much less energy usage. So I guess to answer your question, you're seeing software be applied both to hardware and processes in ways that is significantly improving performance and efficiency.
Well, that's good to hear. Like I said, I thought the focus was a little too much on just analytics, reporting of emission data, and so on. So
yeah, I think this gets back. This ESG movement is another virtue signal of our corporate, goodness to the world, that I think sometimes it often gets decoupled from the reality of what they're actually doing, of what they're producing. We've got this report that identifies all of our components of whatever, fossil fuel usage and environmental, the level of recycling, and they're focused so much on the bureaucracy of making sure we've got all of these things documented, and not enough, I think, on the real customer benefits and shareholder benefits of how efficiency and sustainability can actually be good, not just for the planet, but for the shareholders and customers.
So overall, are you concerned of the direction? What would tell me? Let's end more positively. What excites you about the whole focus on sustainability?
What excites me is the ability to do more with less. I mean, that's always been the goal, and I think it's one we lose sight of. I mean, whether the less leads to less carbon dioxide or less plastic used or whatever your metric, less natural gas burned, that's always the sign of an advancing economy. Being able to get more output from less input. And that's the real positive. The idea that you can, whether it's run advanced AI simulations, on a battery powered laptop, or deliver more packages per hour of UPS driving time, whatever it is, that those are good things to be doing. And they have, they'll have some planetary benefit that we may or may not be able to really ever measure or see, but they have enormous economic and social benefit, because we're doing more with less has always been one of the foundations of human progress. And that I'm optimistic about.
I think that's something very few people will disagree with, right? We get out of the politics, we get out of the West versus East kind of discussions and focus on productivity and, Moore's law and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, just in my own case, I consulted for a company last summer, Bamboo Systems, I'll name them, did a webinar for them as well, along with Stephen Fawcett's company. But their main marketing theme, and it was natural enough, was around CO2 reduction. I mean, that was like the infographic they wanted to highlight. I understand that in the environment we live in, you kind of have to play to your audience. But in the paper that I wrote for them, describing this rather sophisticated model of energy consumption in a data center, I mean, I was really more focused on the efficiency aspect, the amount of compute output versus electric input, whether that's direct power into the racks of machines or the indirect energy required to cool and ventilate the physical space. And sure, the tangential benefit was you're reducing the amount of fossil fuel created depending on where your data center is. I mean, not so much if it's in Iceland, you know, a whole lot if it's in Ashburn, Virginia. But the more direct benefit is you're able to do more work, pack more machines, pack more computing cycles in the same amount of space with less, you know, electric juice coming in. And that was really my primary focus there. Whether, you know, if it's CO2 reduction gets people, you know, in the door, but it's, you know, it's energy efficiency and, you know, the bottom line that makes the sale, you know, that's a marketing thing. But to me, it's really the efficiency should be the driving factor.
Kurt, that is the most pragmatic thing I've heard in a long time. So keep us honest, keep everybody honest. Because in the
I
end,
will.
too many terms are being hijacked. Too many people are being guilted into doing things we probably shouldn't be doing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with the climate change is more about changing behaviors, to be honest, than changing the climate. And that's another discussion. But if that is the goal, changing social behaviors and social and governmental structures, we should be honest about that and not couch it under some environmental do-gooderism.
I think you're raising, we're probably going to drift into someplace
Yeah.
we don't want to go, because
Right.
frankly, if that is the issue, then all citizens should have some say in whether that's where we want to go. So
Correct. All citizens in all countries.
yeah. Well, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But thank you again, Kurt. Appreciate it. You know, a lot of great thoughts, and clearly a very important topic for us and our kids going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Vinnie. Appreciate it.